This video is on the 18-19 budget. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. It'll kind of be like speed round because it's not as important as this year's budget. I just want to focus on the key things. So basically, the focus of last year's budget was providing tax relief for both businesses and individuals, with also trying to lower the deficit. And they also wanted to guarantee essential services like Medicare and hospital and things like that. Basically, the deficit last year was $14.5 billion. That was what we predicted last May, so in May 2018. Now that deficit has been reduced to $4.2 billion because the economy is growing stronger than we think. As you can see here, the underlying deficit's a lot smaller than the headline deficit, and that's because there was a lot of cash outflows for investments in assets and things that don't affect the underlying outcome. So that increased the size of the headline deficit but didn't impact the underlying outcome. Factors impacting the deficit look not as relevant because it's in the past, but basically reducing the deficit. Employment growth was strong last year, the rebounding commodity prices, stronger overseas growth, although this is no longer the case in 1920. Factors keeping the deficit higher, unemployment was above the target range as it is still, and wage growth was low, which means that there was not a big increase in revenues every year. All right, policies for fiscal consolidation. Again, these policies are probably easier than this year's budget, so there's things like a sustainable and targeted welfare system that was involving getting people that were on welfare that had indictable offences, that had not paid outstanding fines, getting them off welfare, or at least making it harder for them to collect welfare. Cracking down on the black economy, so the limited cash payments to $10,000. You provide a service, you cannot collect more than $10,000 in cash for providing that service. There was a fame tax, but that was really confusing, so I'm not going to worry about it. Other things. Higher HEX repayments, so basically they increased the HEX repayment by about 7.5%, so people had to pay more back towards their uni, which would save the government money because in the past they had funded that. There was taxes on multinationals. As I said, they limited cash payments to $10,000. There were also restrictions on welfare. Migrants with outstanding fines. Migrants had to wait an extra year to get their welfare, so that's another policy, and those with outstanding fines often lost welfare. Policies for strong and sustainable growth. Three key ones: the 7-year personal income tax plan. There was the company tax cuts, and there's infrastructure spending. We won't talk about infrastructure spending last year because we've got plenty of stuff to talk about for this year. So in terms of tax relief last year, basically what they did is they applied $530 in tax. I'm not going to go through this actually in detail because you've got this year's taxes and there's enough to think about. So I'm just going to skip this. Okay. And in terms of, continue to skip this, focus on this year's taxes, know this year's taxes really well. Second tax, the lower company taxes. Last year what they did is they lowered the taxes to 27.5% for all firms earning less than $50 million. And if you remember from this year, we've now lowered it again to 25%. Basically last year it was for people, it went from 50 million turnover to 10 million. Now it's 25% for everyone with turnover of less than 50 million. They also had the accelerated depreciation allowances. They just extended it for another year, but this year's been more relevant because they've increased it to 30,000 and increased it for firms earning up to 50 million, where last year it was 10 million. Again, this year is what's more important. I'll skip that. Oh, just with this question here, I haven't had a chance to talk about this in class, but when the government lowers company tax rates, whether that increase or decrease pressure inflation, it really depends on whether you're talking short or long term. So lower company tax rates generally increase inflation in the short term and then reduce inflationary pressures in the long term. And the reason for that is that the recent reduction in company taxes or any company tax cut is likely to promote investment in the short term, which may lead to increased prices because there's more aggregate demand. So that creates employment opportunities, which boost both investment and consumption. In the long term, the increased investment on new plant and equipment helps to boost productivity, which should help to, as they invest in new equipment and technology, which should reduce cost-push inflation. Low inflation, same as this year, asset write-offs, infrastructure package, which is what we were talking about for this year's budget. So there's a whole range of projects. You might want to mention this one just to go in line with the ones we're looking at for this year. So they spent $9.3 billion on a Brisbane inland rail network designed to connect Brisbane to Melbourne, try and reduce travel times and get a lot of trucks off the road. when you're linking infrastructure policies, you don't need to know last year's, but you do need to know this year's. It's really important that you're providing a two-step process to that. So this year's policies, the key ones are the $3 billion Urban Congestion Fund. We have the Geelong to Melbourne Airport Rail Link and lots of funding for the Bruce Highway. But just with this question here, if you get asked to link it to strong and sustainable growth, what you want to do is focus on the short and long term. So in the short term, increased infrastructure spending creates increased G2 spending. That increases demand for labour and incomes, boosting consumption. And then in the long term, that infrastructure can boost our productive capacity and allow for non-inflationary growth by reducing bottlenecks and traffic jams. That reduces transportation costs, makes it more internationally competitive, and boosts our productive capacity. Policies for inflation, again, you don't need to know last year's policies, but for this year, infrastructure spending and the depreciation allowances and all that stuff, it encourages investment in new machinery and equipment. It also increases our productive capacity, which helps to reduce bottlenecks and keep prices down. Those policies can both lead to more inflation in the short term, but it's not really an issue because we're at 1.6%. Last year had a range of policies for full employment. As you can see, these are all targeted towards skills. So I'm just going to focus on a couple of them. I'm not going to worry about learning all of them. But the Skilling Australians Fund was the main one. So if you get asked for a policy from last year and this year, last year the Skilling Australians Fund, this year the policies directed at jobs for today and tomorrow. So last year's policy, there was $250 million towards the Skilling Australians Fund. And basically what that did is they created 40,000 transition to workplaces, which was designed for people from 15 to 21 years of age. And essentially what they did is they provided employers money. So older Australians that took on employers would be paid up to $2,000. So if businesses employed older people. There was also lots of mentorship and support offered for people to help with these people into workplaces. So there was a lot of mentoring and assistance and money going towards that for people that are out of work. So as part of this progress, part of the Skilling Australians Fund, there was transition to work, and as that was all about people developing practical skills, connecting people with education and training, helping them with work experience, trying to find job opportunities. So really all it was about mentoring and providing support to these people with disengaged and disadvantaged young people. So essentially, sorry. So some of the things you could talk about in relation to skills from this year's budget would be the 18-19 budget, the $250 million fund, Skilling Australian Fund, would help to equip apprenticeships and trainees with skills for the future. So there was $89 million on 40,000 transition to workplaces, and businesses will also be eligible for incentives or payments as part of apprenticeships. These policies should help to equip both younger and older people with skills and therefore improve the goal of full employment. Last thing, don't worry about living standards for last year's budget because there's enough on it for this year's budget. Thank you.